Perception of conspiracy. There is an ancient parable from India that you may have heard before. It recounts a group of blind wise men taking turns to decide, by their sense of touch alone, what exactly an elephant is. One man feels the tail and says it is like a rope. Another man feels the ear and says it is like a fan. Another feels the leg and describes it as a tree. Another feels the tusk and believes it's like a spear. In the end, none of the men fully comprehends the body of the elephant, each man being able to see only separate parts of the whole. Had any of the men done an overall inspection, he would have come to a drastically different conclusion about the behemoth standing before him. When presented with an argument that certain things happening in the world are due to the deliberate and organized efforts of a group of malevolent actors, people can find it hard to accept. Many are inclined to immediately dismiss the very notion as preposterous. I believe the main reason that people tend to reflexively reject such ideas is that they do not see the connections among the supposed perpetrators or their motives and actions. Concerning allegations of extreme malevolence, there also arises natural doubt that evil of such magnitude could exist in the hearts of human beings, as we tend to think of people as being basically good, especially the leaders we have been conditioned to trust implicitly to safeguard our well-being. This is part of a passage from Adolf Hitler's Mein Kampf, wherein he reveals his conception of the big lie as an effective strategy for deceiving the masses. Despite that he was accusing the Jews of this as he wrote it, history has shown well enough that it was actually he who applied this principle to turn the German people against the Jews. Quote, "In the big lie there is always a certain force of credibility, because the broad masses of a nation are always more easily corrupted in the deeper strata of their emotional nature than consciously or voluntarily, and thus, in the primitive simplicity of their minds, they more readily fall victims to the big lie than the small lie, since they themselves often tell small lies in little matters, but would be ashamed to resort to large-scale falsehoods. It would never come into their heads to fabricate colossal untruths, and they would not believe others could have the impudence to distort the truth so infamously. Even though the facts which prove this to be so may be brought clearly to their minds, they will still doubt and waver, and will continue to think there may be some other explanation." Unquote. It is fair-minded to assume positive intent in the actions of others unless you have some good reason not to. So it is reasonable that we would want to see evidence that a sinister motive, unity of purpose, and intention really exist before we begin suspecting others' words and deeds as conspiratorial. I believe that a secondary reason for the reticence of most people to even consider such possibilities is that the popular interpretation of the term conspiracy has, over time, had a connotation of absurdity attached to it. The word conspiracy comes from Latin roots suggestive of breathing together or together in spirit. It refers to a group of people colluding, usually secretly, to achieve a common selfish objective. In today's world, especially in the news media, the lone word conspiracy is broadly and quite incorrectly tossed back and forth as a sort of shorthand for conspiracy theory. In turn, conspiracy theory is often used fallaciously as a label meant to damn to the realm of the irrational any notion of people conspiring to achieve a nefarious goal, as though this were a non-existent phenomenon. In the real world, though, men have been known to conspire against others since the dawn of time, and a theory is simply an idea about something that remains to be demonstrated as fact. Any theory of any kind should be judged on its merits. I suspect that a shift in the perception of that word may have been deliberately made, in psychology texts, for example, by those who have had the influence to do so, and wish to see it disappear from the vocabulary of serious inquiry. After all, would it not benefit the planners of the greatest conspiracies against mankind to convince its victims that ideas of conspiracies were the fantasies of overactive minds, or signs of mental illness? As one old saying goes, the best trick the devil ever pulled was to persuade the world that he didn't exist. If we abandon all common sense and pretend to be unaware of the ways in which greed and power can corrupt the thoughts and actions of men, then we might be able to delude ourselves into thinking that people abruptly ceased all organized plotting of evil schemes after some climactic instance in history which was the final one, that all organized crimes against humanity that have occurred since then have just been unplanned, spontaneous events. Otherwise, as long as we maintain a firm grip on reality, we should still keep an open mind and a watchful eye. In this world, absolute proof of anything is elusive, and anything one person holds up as proof could somehow be deemed meaningless by another. What is still relevant, though, is the significance of evidence to the minds of most rational people. The more compelling the evidence is in the perception of the observer, the closer to proof it is regarded. I want to be clear that, in these pages, I'm not professing to show proof, but rather attempting to show an interconnected body of evidence which points to the conclusion that we, the majority of the human race, are being targeted in a concerted, malevolent aim. Although I believe this threat is originally and ultimately spiritual in nature and is ancient, I feel that since 2019 it has been manifesting in the physical world more acutely, pervasively, and rapidly than most of us alive today have ever experienced. Although I have no aspiration of being able to see the bigger picture in all of its complex detail, I will attempt to draw a clear enough outline of the beast that stands before us so that you might recognize it as I do. The spiritual impulse behind the United Nations. In the late 1960s, American writer and theatrical producer Myron Fagan claimed that the United Nations was the crux of the great conspiracy to destroy the sovereignty of the United States, in his audio exposé entitled Illuminati CFR. His story began all the way back at the formation of the Order of the Illuminati by Adam Weishaupt in the 1760s, with the backing of Meyer Rothschild, and the various names and guises that it has subsequently operated under, including Freemasonry, during the course of its slow march toward world domination. As for the Illuminati, despite having been mystified in popular fiction over the years, there is nothing paranormal about its story that we should see it catalogued with myths and legends. Adam Weishaupt certainly modeled his Illuminist organization after other prominent secret societies of the time, such as Freemasonry and the Rosicrucian Order, that claimed heritage to ancient Egyptian mystery cults which had stewarded bodies of arcane knowledge down through the millennia. And he embellished Illuminism with the same sort of allegory and esoteric symbolism that lent it such an appearance. Although there are reports that he had traveled to Egypt and studied Eastern religions and mysticism for a few years before he established his Order of the Illuminati, it is hard to say whether Weishaupt was more a devotee of spiritualism or a power-hungry opportunist leveraging the impression of being one in order to attract supporters at a time when fraternal societies, the more enigmatic the better, were in vogue among hobnobbing affluents. However, that is not to deny that his agenda was diabolically inspired. Weishaupt's plan to subjugate humanity under the pretense of liberating the common man from enslavement by evil despots was devised and set in motion in an era that was marked by social unrest and primed for revolutions, which he undoubtedly saw as an opportune moment. So strikingly similar is Illuminism in its basic principles to what we recognize as communism today, that it is reasonable to guess that it was used as the template for the Marxist doctrine drawn up many decades later. To illustrate this, Weishaupt's 7-part plan for Illuminism was as follows: abolition of all ordered governments, abolition of private property, abolition of inheritance, abolition of patriotism, abolition of the family unit, abolition of religion, creation of a new world order, or world government. I recommend listening to Fagan's presentation for his rich insights into the shady and intricate history of the affair, from the inception of the Illuminati through to the late 1960s. My starting point within this timeline is more recent, though, with the focus on the spiritual orientation of the United Nations, those who claim to be directing it, and the progression of related developments which have become increasingly overt and personally impactful on ordinary people into 2022. Since its foundation in 1922 by one Alice Bailey, The organization named the Lucis Trust has served as the supporting platform for the publication of her series of 24 books of esoteric philosophy, as well as other endeavors, including the establishment of the occult Arcane School, the Beacon Magazine, a program involving group meditation called Triangles, and the World Goodwill Organization. Bailey was deeply immersed in occultism, having been an avid scholar of Theosophy, and was an inspirator of the New Age movement. Bailey and the Lucis Trust have maintained that she only cooperated in authoring her written works containing the teachings of one she identified as Master Djwal Khul, whom she frequently referred to as the Tibetan Master, and regarded as a member of a group of ancient masters of wisdom, a non-corporeal entity whose messages she claimed to have received via spirit channeling. The Theosophical Society, whose teachings Bailey espoused, was co-founded in 1875 by Helena Blavatsky, who also claimed such a connection with the ancient masters. Revealing a crucial tenet of the Theosophical belief system is this passage from Blavatsky's book, The Secret Doctrine. Quote, "It is Satan who is the god of our planet and the only god, and this without any elusive metaphor to its wickedness and depravity." Unquote. In case anyone might think that this was taken out of context, be aware that Lucis Trust points out that, quote, "In 1887, the magazine of the Theosophical Society took Lucifer as its name, in an effort to bring clarity to what it regarded as an unfairly maligned sacrificing angel." Unquote. Similarly, the publishing house that Alice Bailey and her husband Foster Bailey set up under the umbrella of the Lucis Trust was originally named Lucifer Publishing Company, until the name was changed a few years later. Today, the Lucis Trust offers the explanation that Bailey and her husband, quote, "like the great teacher H.P. Blavatsky, for whom they had enormous respect, sought to elicit a deeper understanding of the sacrifice made by Lucifer," unquote, which refers to the fall from his position in the heavens, in order to grant the gift of illumination to the minds of human beings. In their spiritual philosophy, Lucifer was a liberating hero of humanity, and God was an oppressive tyrant who sought to prevent mankind from achieving true awareness and reaching its full potential. Given that Lucifer is venerated in the belief system that it promotes, the imperatives of the Lucis Trust and those who are in league with it would wisely be regarded as satanically inspired. Quote, "And the great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent, who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him." Unquote. Revelation 12:9. The Luciferian story of Satan both starkly contrasts and closely parallels the historic account given in Abrahamic scriptures of the banishment of Lucifer, along with a cohort of other rebellious angels that he brought down with him, from the heaven where God dwells, as the consequence of his prideful defiance of God's sovereignty and his jealous loathing for his creation of humankind. Lucifer transmitted forbidden knowledge to the first generation of humans, which they accepted in defiance of God's commandment, and this, similarly, led to their own egoism, loss of innocence, and expulsion from what had been a state of perfect harmony with God in his immediate presence. I believe that the Luciferian twist on Satan as a benevolent entity is a strategy designed to appeal to those who lack the spiritual grounding to avoid being duped into accepting a reversal in polarity of the nature of the devil from that which has been commonly known by the three major Abrahamic religions for thousands of years. All followers of the Abrahamic religions understand well that Lucifer and Satan are two names of the same spiritual entity, the adversary of God, and reject both the claims of Luciferian spiritualists that he retains his original virtuous nature as a holy angel, and the claims of Satanic atheists that he does not actually exist other than as a symbolic figure. We are also aware that the devil is notoriously deceptive and achieves his purpose simply by causing a person to turn away from God, a person's belief in his existence being irrelevant to his success. The number of followers of modern organized Satanism, atheistic as the Satanic Church and Temple both profess the religion to be, would be naturally limited to those that could be gathered from among the imaginably small subset of people who reject the notion of the supernatural, but would still be comfortable chanting "Hail Satan," engaging in religious rites and rituals, including human sacrifice, and so on. So it does make sense that for Satan's following to continue to grow, another angle was used, portraying Satan in a positive spiritual light, as he is in Luciferian Theosophy. Cloaked in brilliance, declaring unity, peace, and goodwill toward all, promising the elevation of humanity to greater heights of wisdom, a deceptively Christ-like figure, the freshly rebranded image of Lucifer would be hard to resist for many who are well-meaning yet spiritually misguided. For the father of lies, that the truth of his sinister aims will eventually be discovered by his New Age followers would presumably not matter, as the number of souls led into ruin in the end will have justified the means of their recruitment. For many decades, the United Nations has been, you might say, courted by the Lucis Trust, which enjoys consultative status with the Economic and Social Council of the UN that allows it to take part in formal deliberations. Its U.S. headquarters is conveniently located at United Nations Plaza. Unsurprisingly, another of its 3 global offices is located in Geneva, Switzerland, which is where one of the 4 UN offices and the headquarters of the World Economic Forum are both also situated. The founder and president of the Aquarian Age community, Dr. Ida Urso, who happens to have been the director of the Lucis Trust's World Goodwill Organization, gave a speech in 1995 at a conference at the Lucis Trust's Arcane School entitled, "Let Purpose Guide the Little Wills of Men, the Spiritual Impulse Behind the United Nations," wherein she framed the role of the United Nations within the context of the theosophical worldview, concluding her presentation with a quote about the UN taken from The Externalization of the Hierarchy, one of the books of Alice Bailey. In Alice Bailey's writings, she mentioned the United Nations repeatedly and stressed the critical role that the UN will play when it, quote, emerges into factual and actual power, unquote, in bringing about the New World Order, alongside which will arise a New World religion. Quote, "Thus, the expressed aims and efforts of the United Nations will be eventually brought to fruition, and a new Church of God, gathered out of all religions and spiritual groups, will unitedly bring to an end the great heresy of separateness," unquote. Although the Lucis Trust's formal connection is acknowledged by the UN in its online database of consultative NGOs, which is no small group, mind you, the manner and extent that Lucis Trust engages with the UN is not elaborated on there. It is, however, detailed on Lucis Trust's website, on its page entitled Support of the United Nations. According to Lucis Trust, its World Goodwill Organization, which seeks to apply the theosophical teachings of its arcane school in addressing global problems, has been organizing regular monthly meditation sessions at the United Nations for decades, since the tradition was started by, quote, a number of spiritually oriented co-workers of the UN in Geneva, unquote. World Goodwill is also on the Council of the Spiritual Caucus at the United Nations, a group of spiritually oriented NGOs which holds regular meetings at the UN's headquarters in New York for meditation, the sharing of insights, and exploration of ways of using inner focus in service to the work of the UN to, quote, balance and strengthen the endeavors of the UN system and its affiliates, unquote. Both Lucis Trust and World Goodwill are listed as members of the NGO Forum on Spirituality and Values of the NGO Alliance on Global Concerns, quote, for an efficient NGO engagement with the United Nations, unquote. Lucis Trust's webpage for its World Goodwill organization practically showers praise on the United Nations and begs people to focus their meditative energies and prayers on it, send donations to it, talk about it, learn about it, teach about it, etc. On its worldwide network Units of Service webpage, it recommends, quote, informing the public of the principles and programs of the United Nations, a major externalized focal point of the energy of goodwill, unquote, as an activity in the same list and apparently of the same level of priority as, quote, distributing the great invocation, a world prayer, and forming meditative triangles of light and goodwill. This all goes to show the faith they place in the UN as the shining star of hope for the realization of their cause. The UN's observance of the annual World Interfaith Harmony Week, not surprisingly, appears to be on track with Alice Bailey's prophecy and Adam Weishaupt's Illuminatist goal for a new world religion, which has been carried forward by Lucis Trust and World Goodwill. Lucis Trust's own evaluation of World Interfaith Harmony Week, while admitting that it does not encompass the three fundamental truths at the core of its envisioned New World religion, is that it is a platform bringing together many faiths and interfaith groups, and thus still provides, quote, a basis to build upon, unquote. For them, the UN is a work in progress. Although the Lucis Trust and its various programs are very clear about their directing of spiritual energies of, quote, goodwill, unquote, at the United Nations, reliable accounts of their people physically meeting with UN personnel are difficult to find. I suspect that this might be intentionally so, considering the Lucis Trust's controversial occultist worldview in contrast to the UN's need to keep up an appearance of universal neutrality. However, for what it's worth, in 1962, there was an article entitled Between the Lines, The Universal Theocratic State, written by Edith Kermit Roosevelt in the New Hampshire Sunday Times News, wherein she reported that, quote, recognizing the goofy network to be a source of power and influence, UN officials lecture at meetings of the Arcane School, the international group of New World servers who form triangles to work for UNESCO, unquote. Recall that the Arcane School and triangles are projects of the Lucis Trust, and know that the New World servers is the name of their worldwide network of individuals and organizations who have committed to disseminating their theosophical teachings and participating in prescribed triangle group meditation sessions to target their spiritual energies. In Alice Bailey's book, The Destiny of the Nations, published in 1949, she delineated what she called 3 planetary centers from which emanate the spiritual impulses that correspond to the 3 aspects of the nature of God, giving the name and related concepts for each, including Shambhala, will or power, planetary head center, ruler, Sanat Kumara, the Lord of the world. The hierarchy, love-wisdom, planetary heart center, ruler, the Christ. Humanity, active intelligence, planetary throat center, ruler, Lucifer. Keeping in mind that Bailey had mentioned the Lord of the World in her writings as early as 1922 in Letters on Occult Meditation, it is curious that the Lord of the World was also the title of a dystopian novel that had been published 15 years earlier by Catholic Monsignor Robert Hugh Benson, that told of the rise of a unified world system of governance under the Antichrist, to whom his title refers. Despite that the story was a work of fiction, it has recently been upheld, for better or worse, by 2 successive popes as being a potentially accurate forecast of how future events might unfold through the establishment of a new world order. Even if we dismiss as pure coincidence the existence of a book of the same name referring to the Antichrist not long before Alice Bailey's writings began, and we take it for granted that Bailey was unaware of it, the term Lord of the World is still undeniably reminiscent of various terms found in the New Testament of the Bible, including ruler of this world, John 12:31, 14:30, 16:11, and God of this world, 2 Corinthians 4:4, that are well-known references to Satan. As accustomed as she was to quoting passages from Scripture, there is no reason to doubt that Bailey was aware of this. One is then reasonably inclined to wonder whether the name Sanat the entity whom Bailey named as Lord of the World, was actually an anagram for Satan. If she meant to so obscure her reference to Satan, then her overtness in having named Lucifer as the ruler of an aspect of the nature of God is puzzling, even if the fact that she named him is not surprising. As for Bailey's mention of the Christ, which Christians will know is entirely misplaced between the first and third so-called rulers as perceived above, note that she used this term extensively throughout her esoteric philosophy. There are no less than 167 occurrences of Christ found in an open text search of her books on the Lucis Trust website, as well as 33 instances of Jesus. Although these two names featured prominently in Bailey's spiritual philosophy, it becomes apparent from even cursory reading that Bailey was not describing the same Jesus Christ that Christians recognize as the Son of God, and that Muslims also regard as the Messiah. To illustrate this point, here is a statement from Bailey's book, Rays and the Initiations, by which she clearly distinguished Master Jesus and the Christ as separate identities. Quote, "The second and much the most important rent, that is, rending of the veil, was made by the power of the second aspect when the Christ subjected the Master Jesus to the fourth initiation, and their joint influence was triumphant over death." Unquote. Christians and Muslims are left to wonder exactly whom Bailey did regard as the Messiah, if the Christ in her mind was not perpetually one and the same as Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Mary. Bailey wrote of divine energies of distinctly varying character that affect the disposition and destiny of mankind, which she called rays. Two such rays that she claimed have a particularly powerful influence over mankind during the present era are the waning sixth ray of abstract devotion or idealism, and the waxing seventh ray of ceremonial magic or organization. To examine the significance that Bailey attributed to these, let us review a couple of passages from her book, The Destiny of Nations. Quote, "Suffice it to say that the sixth ray people are the reactionaries, the conservatives, the diehards and the fanatics, who hold on to all that is of the past and whose influence is potent to hinder the progress of humanity into the new age. Their name is Legion. They provide, however, a needed balance and are responsible for a steadying process which is much needed in the world at this time." Unquote. In the above passage, Bailey characterized those who maintain conservative traditional values as an obstacle to the spiritual evolution of humanity. She took a passive-aggressive stab at such people, effectively equating them with unclean spirits by stating, quote, "Their name is Legion." Unquote. For those who do not understand it, this is a veiled biblical reference to the collective response given to Jesus by a host of demons inhabiting a man when, in the course of the exorcism, Jesus asked what the demon's name was. They replied, quote, "My, or our name is Legion, for we are many." Unquote. Mark 5:9. Bailey then implied that such people are, even so, a necessary evil, at least for the time being, for the stabilizing purpose they serve. Quote, "The seventh ray is steadily gaining momentum and has for a long time been stimulating and enhancing the activity of all fifth ray nations. If you bear in mind that one of the major objectives of seventh ray energy is to bring together and to relate spirit and matter and also substance and form, note this distinction, you can see for yourself that the work of science is closely connected with this endeavor, and that the creation of the new forms will definitely be the result of a working interaction between the rulers of the fifth, the second, and the seventh rays, aided by the help, on demand, of the ruler of the first ray. A large number of seventh ray egos or souls, and also of men and women with seventh ray personalities, are coming into incarnation now, and to them is committed the task of organizing the activities of the new era, and of ending the old methods of life, and the old crystallized attitudes to life, to death, to leisure, and to the population." Unquote. To explain the above passage, Bailey asserted that the ever-growing influence of ceremonial magic or organization, the seventh ray, has been driving scientifically advanced nations, the fifth ray, toward achieving the goal of synthesizing human spirit, matter, substance, and form into new life forms, and that this will be accomplished with the cooperation of Christ's ray, which is the second ray, which, considering Bailey's dubious meaning of the Christ, should be taken with a grain of salt, or even a proverbial pinch of salt thrown over the shoulder, and of government, the first ray, wherever necessary. Now, granted that Bailey did not specifically state that the new forms to be created will be new forms of human life, this can be inferred. She said that the new physical forms would be created through scientific advancements and would incorporate spirit, soul. That she did mean new human life forms will become all the more evident when we examine in just a moment exactly how this prophecy is being materialized today. Bailey went on to say that both spiritual entities and people who are heavily influenced by the energy of ceremonial magic or organization, the seventh ray, are increasingly emerging on the earth for the purpose of bringing an end to traditional ways of living, and or the conventional means of progenerating life, and customary perspectives on life, death, leisure, and the population in order to usher in the new age. At the present moment, there is no clearer manifestation of Bailey's prophecy of scientific advancement toward the creation of new forms of life, and the concomitant redefinition of life and death, than the movement of transhumanism, of which the most openly vocal proponent today is the World Economic Forum, WEF. The World Economic Forum also happens to have a formal alliance with the UN for the expressed purpose of advancing the UN's objectives. In June 2019, the two organizations entered into a strategic partnership framework outlining areas of cooperation to deepen institutional engagement and jointly accelerate the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The WEF seeks to bring about, through its trademark Great Reset agenda, what it envisions as the Fourth Industrial Revolution, as outlined by the WEF's founder Klaus Schwab in his 2017 book of the same title. The WEF states that, quote, "The Fourth Industrial Revolution is characterized by a range of new technologies that are fusing the physical, digital, and biological worlds, impacting all disciplines, economies, and industries, and even challenging ideas about what it means to be human," unquote. Once again, reflect back on Alice Bailey's foretelling of the ending of crystallized attitudes toward life and death. The WEF paints an even clearer picture of the impact on human beings when it states, quote, "Emerging technologies, particularly in the biological realm, are also raising new questions about what it means to be human. The Fourth Industrial Revolution is the first, where the tools of technology can become literally embedded within us and even purposefully change who we are at the level of our genetic makeup. It is completely conceivable that forms of radical human improvement will be available within a generation, innovations that risk creating entirely new forms of inequality and class conflict," unquote. At this point, there should be no question in your mind that the WEF, through the sciences of biodigital convergence and genetic engineering, intends for the creation of new types of human life so far beyond natural man that they will be regarded as a superior class. This is in line with Alice Bailey's occult prophecy. The WEF proposes medical procedures including neurotechnological brain enhancements and genetic editing as potential means to that end. Considering that most of the novel vaccines are effectively gene therapies and that they contain nanoparticles suspended in solution, one could speculate that they may be, or be prototypical of, a combinative medium, a sort of transmission fluid, if you will, in this process of fusing human biology with technology. Quote, "The merging of our physical, our digital, and our biological identity," unquote, as Schwab put it in his talk at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs in May 2019, literally means augmenting the brains and bodies of humans or other living creatures, possibly even in combination with non-living objects, with digital technology. This has been termed biodigital convergence. If this sounds implausible, consider that Elon Musk's enterprise Neuralink is reportedly nearly ready to implant microchips into human brains. Several years ago, Bill Gates' company Microsoft registered a patent for a process of generating digital currency from the energy produced from human bodily activity, which the patent's description says could be achieved by connecting a computer to a person using a brainwave monitoring MRI device. Curiously, the patent number was 060606. Imagine that Mark Zuckerberg's metaverse, a digital virtual world where one can pretend to do anything, might become the enveloping reality for many who are converged. These concepts are no longer the stuff of science fiction fantasy. These are real things that very rich, powerful, and opportunistic people are making happen, purportedly for the well-being of mankind. Although these technologies may gather favor among the public by being marketed from the humanitarian angle of restoring functions to those who have suffered disablements, which is certainly an admirable cause, one can see that Klaus Schwab's wish for biodigital convergence does not seem to be for the benefit of any particular subgroup of the population. He is speaking generally. Schwab's angle seems to be more about making people smarter and more productive, which just so happen to be ideal criteria for an efficient workforce. To get a vivid mental image of what biodigital convergence might look like if allowed to permeate our lives to the extent the WEF hopes it will, look no further than the scenarios for the future being proposed by the policy foresight arm of the Government of Canada, which is quite earnestly exploring the potential applications of biodigital convergence to society. The February 2020 white paper issued by this agency, Policy Horizons Canada, entitled Exploring Biodigital Convergence, first breaches the topic using phraseology which clearly mimics that of the WEF's, and then reveals, quote, "Robots with biological brains and biological bodies with digital brains already exist, as do human-computer and brain-machine interfaces. The medical use of digital devices in humans, as well as digitally manipulated insects such as drone dragonflies and surveillance locusts, are examples of digital technology being combined with biological entities. By tapping into the nervous system and manipulating neurons, tech can be added to an organism to alter its function and purpose. New human bodies and new senses of identity could arise as the convergence continues." Unquote. The paper also mentions a few other new forms of life, including partly biological furniture and houses that grow. The point in this literature that is perhaps what the average person will find the most disturbing is where it suggests that this new paradigm will require that people alter their perceptions of what is alive and what is not. It raises the philosophical question of how much tolerance God has for the alteration of the naturally created human form in recognizing human beings. Knowing who the scientists are, one should seriously consider whether exceeding his tolerance might be precisely the goal of the experiment. On this point, once again, recall Alice Bailey's foretelling of the ending of crystallized attitudes toward life and death once these new life forms are brought into existence. This is an unmistakable sign that the Canadian government, for one, is working to align its future policies with the WEF's goal of transhumanizing mankind to fulfill the dream of the Luciferian occultists who guide the hand of the UN. This would not be unexpected given that Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was a WEF protege, having been groomed to champion its cause during his time as a member of the organization's Young Global Leaders program, just as many of the world's current leaders and influencers of government, enterprise, academia, and media have also been. In fact, the founder of the WEF, Klaus Schwab, confirmed both the influence over the Canadian government that his organization had already established and the WEF's ongoing program of deploying its young global leaders to infiltrate the decision-making bodies of national governments, when, during a filmed discussion with David R. Gergen at the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard in September 2017, he said, quote,
"When I mention now names like Mrs. Merkel, even Vladimir Putin and so on, they all have been young global leaders of the World Economic Forum. Mm-hmm. But what we are very proud of now is the young generation, like Prime Minister Trudeau, President of Argentina and so on, that we penetrate the cabinets. So yesterday I was at a reception for Prime Minister Trudeau, and I know that half of this cabinet, or even more half of this cabinet, are actually young global leaders of the World Economic Forum.
Unquote. The WEF selects individuals for its Young Global Leaders YGL program who are under 40 years old, have already established themselves in positions of leadership, and, quote, are willing to devote their energy and expertise for 5 years to tackle the most critical issues facing the world, unquote. In 2005, the year that the new YGL group was created, the YGL nomination committee was chaired by Queen Rania of Jordan, and was, interestingly, comprised entirely of highly influential figures in mass media, including Steve Forbes, CEO James R. Murdoch of British Sky Broadcasting Group, CEO Robert C. Wright of NBC, as well as executives of the New York Times, Newsweek, Yahoo, the Daily Mail, and Reuters, just to name a few. This is presumably because the media plays such a crucial role in popularizing these individuals and their viewpoints. In 2005, the first members of the Young Global Leaders were implored to engage in the 2020 initiative and form task forces, quote, on priority issues and develop global and regional strategies, concrete actions, and measurable benchmarks, unquote, to advance, quote, a shared vision of the world in 2020, unquote. In retrospect, it comes as no surprise that on the 2020 initiative's topic of Health in 2020, the very first bullet point in the list of examples of challenges and opportunities was communicable diseases, outbreaks, and pandemics. A catalog of the names, photos, and professional titles of members of the WEF's Young Global Leaders alumni network is found on the group's website. There are entries for some notable people, including French President Emmanuel Macron and Facebook Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg. However, this is not a comprehensive list of alumni, as it only goes back as far as 2016, and as YGL graduates need to proactively register themselves in order to be displayed as members of the YGL alumni network, naturally not all of them would. The YGL website claims a total of over 1,400 active members and alumni combined. I have extensively researched archived WEF lists of honorees to identify the members of this group going back to its origin in 1993, when it was named Global Leaders for Tomorrow, GLT, and have unearthed over 3,500 alumni throughout the world, including some of the individuals whom Klaus Schwab named in 2017 as previous members, such as Angela Merkel. I should mention, though, that Vladimir Putin and the President of Argentina, who was then Mauricio Macri, were never listed as honorees. The number of these people who hold influential positions in national governments, large corporations, media outlets, and universities is astounding. By comparison, the WEF's Global Shapers community, quote, a network of young people driving dialogue, action, and change, unquote, which is to train its future agents of global influence in the 1 decade younger age bracket, touts vastly more impressive numbers. Over 10,200 active and 4,100 alumni members, with 457 hubs located in 148 countries. Active membership in the group appears to have nearly doubled since January 2016, based on a briefing published by the European Parliamentary Research Service, which stated that there were 5,300 members at that time. Similar to that for the Young Global Leaders Alumni Network, a catalog of the names and photos of registered members of the Global Shapers Alumni Network is accessible on its website. While examining the shared goals of the UN and the WEF, it is pertinent to reflect on the tenets of Marxism, as they have apparently embraced them as guiding principles. This can be seen at various points in the WEF's literature. As stated on its website, quote, "Rethinking capitalism, or giving capitalism a great reset," as WEF Chairman Klaus Schwab has clarified, means that capitalism and socialism will need to merge to create a productive and inclusive economic and social model, unquote. So, the WEF is prescribing a higher dose of socialism for the world as the cure for its economic and social ills. In November 2016, on the Twitter social media platform, the WEF released a short video entitled 8 Predictions for the World in 2030. Although the video was not well received by the Twitter community in general, provoked many viewers to leave negative comments, and was deleted some days thereafter, it is still viewable on the WEF website. The first and most infamous prediction declared in the video was, quote, "You'll own nothing and you'll be happy," unquote, then qualified by, quote, "Whatever you want you'll rent and it'll be delivered by drone," unquote. With that in mind, let us now reflect on what Marx and Engels had to say about property ownership in the Manifesto of the Communist Party. Quote, "The distinguishing feature of communism is not the abolition of property generally, but the abolition of bourgeois property. But modern bourgeois private property is the final and most complete expression of the system of producing and appropriating products that is based on class antagonisms, on the exploitation of the many by the few. In this sense, the theory of the communists may be summed up in the single sentence, abolition of private property," unquote. The parallelism between the WEF's notion that private property will cease to exist and Marxism's avowal of that outlook as being a cornerstone of communist ideology is impossible to ignore. In fairness, though, do note that abolishment of private property had been decreed over 70 years earlier by Adam Weishaupt as one of his 7 goals of Illuminism. The webpage on the WEF website where the video is posted explains that the predictions were elicited from experts from its various global future councils after they were asked what they thought the world would be like in 2030. This page also offers a lengthier elaboration of the underlying basis for each curtly stated prediction in the video, including a link to a separate WEF-hosted article relevant to each. The linked page there containing the article underlying the "You'll Own Nothing" prediction no longer exists. However, that article, actually a futuristic story entitled "Welcome to 2030, I Own Nothing, Have No Privacy, and Life Has Never Been Better," written by Ida Auken, a Danish member of parliament, and of the WEF's Young Global Leaders group, was also published to Forbes.com by the WEF on November 10, 2016, and can still be read there. Do recall that Steve Forbes sat on the Young Global Leaders nomination committee. As far as offering a meaningful explanation for why we will own nothing by 2030, Auken's utopian story only says that a breakthrough in the harnessing of and transition to clean energy will trigger such drastic reductions in the costs of communications, transportation, and gradually everything else, including food, clothing, and even housing, that it will all ultimately become free, and so there will no longer be any need to own anything. Auken's tale also reveals dark dystopian aspects of life in this future world. Living inside the city, one contends with the looming fear of being punished for one's thoughts and dreams, which are continuously recorded, complete absence of privacy, and mandatory registration for any type of travel. The story also clarifies that the green areas between the cities dare not be touched by citizens, that there are plenty enough trees and grass planted inside the city for people to get a sense of nature there. Outside the city dwell the disaffected, the technologically overwhelmed, and the politically uncompliant, who must fend for themselves in primitive settlements. Nonetheless, this is the narrative that the WEF offers up to justify our eventual ownership of nothing. A world where the boon of green energy renders personal possessions obsolete and our lives materially carefree, but which, it is unapologetically implied, will be only for those of us willing to give up our unrestricted freedom of movement and our privacy to the point that even our innermost thoughts are no longer our own. Alkin concludes her story by brushing off these infringements of basic human rights as occasional annoyances in what is, all in all, a good life, and expresses that her pity is really for, quote, all the people who do not live in our city, those we lost on the way, unquote. Apparently, we are being warned of the consequences of not going along with the plan. The WEF and the UN use certain buzzwords in the literature of their intertwined agendas that alert us to their influence over a wide range of institutions. If, when reading a corporation's mission statement or a university's code of ethics these days, you encounter the words equity, stakeholder, sustainability, or reimagine, you can be fairly sure that they are on board the same globalist agenda train headed for the New World Order with an ETA of 2030. Equity is a tricky word. It seems to have surreptitiously crept in and replaced equality in so many texts everywhere, so that we hardly noticed. Equity describes the ideal that the sum of wealth of a group's members is apportioned equally among those members. The WEF says that, quote, wealth is abundant thanks to capitalism, but now that wealth needs to be evenly distributed, as socialists have long called for, unquote. Now, the common interpretation of stakeholder capitalism is a paradigm in which profit-making enterprises seek not only to enrich their shareholders, but also to act responsibly in consideration of the needs of all who may be affected by their activities. But what is a stakeholder really? In literal terms, it is someone who holds a figurative stake, which, ever since the phrase originated with reference to wooden stakes that marked the claimed boundaries of one's property, means a claim of ownership to something. The WEF advocates an equitable redistribution of wealth and a new system of stakeholder capitalism, while its expressed view is that we will own nothing by the year 2030. So that poses a conundrum. How could one possess an equitable share of the society's wealth while simultaneously owning nothing? I assert that one couldn't, unless the sum of the society's wealth were zero, in which case one's share of it would also be. Zero is nothing, after all. Moreover, how would an economic system of stakeholder capitalism even be possible if no one actually had a stake of ownership in anything, much less the means of production, or even the ability to accrue profits? Well, they did say we would own nothing, but they never said they would own nothing. I suspect that, after some amount of double talk, semantic gymnastics, and legislative sleight of hand, the reality of stakeholder capitalism will eventually turn out to be a mixture of capitalism for the stakeholders and socialism for the rest of us. It looks unlikely for Alkin's story of green energy displacing fossil fuels to the extent that everything becomes free to come true by 2030. So, how would they go about redistributing our wealth to the point that we would own nothing by 2030, you might ask? Based on what we've seen thus far, one answer that seems to fit well overall is establishment of a crisis, or, to be increasingly specific, crisis mitigation measures, or financial destruction caused by crisis mitigation measures, or advantage taking of the financial destruction caused by crisis mitigation measures. All of these events constitute how, because they are parts of a singular process. These are examples of it during the past couple of years. Investment firms like BlackRock, whose executive ranks have included at least 4 of the WEF's young global leaders since 2016, have been buying up single-family homes at rapid pace across the United States, from homeowners who are selling to relocate, either for new work opportunities in the wake of business closures and job losses resulting from pandemic lockdowns and vaccination mandates, or to escape undesirable living conditions in areas where crime rates have risen due to the defunding of police departments to appease critical race theory ideologues. Unfortunately, many of these sellers are discovering after moving out that, due to overbidding by such investment firms which are eager to pick up as many houses as possible at whatever cost, which has artificially skewed home values upward, buying a next house to move into has become impossibly unaffordable. Eviction moratoriums effected by the CDC and U.S. Congress, which they justified firstly to minimize viral transmission, and secondly to ease the burden of renters in the prevailing wave of economic hardship resulting from business closures and job losses caused by pandemic lockdowns, have made countless owners of rental properties unable to eject millions of delinquent tenants and replace them with paying ones, thereby putting those property owners at risk of not having the cash flow to keep up with their property loan payments and thus defaulting and having their properties seized by the banks. More directly, many lose their sources of income, again, due to failed businesses and lost jobs caused by pandemic lockdowns and vaccination mandates, and are forced to deplete their savings and liquidate whatever assets they can, until eventually running out of money, defaulting on their mortgages, and having their homes repossessed. At various points over the years, with the expressed aim of boosting economic growth to address crises of lagging national economies, central banks have enacted fiscal stimulus measures which have increased the available supply of money and credit. Although this may sound good, this is deliberate inflation that equates to a loss in value, relative to other nations' currencies, of the currency in which a nation's citizens get paid and hold their savings. The more that such a nation's economy relies on foreign supplies of goods and services, the more this inflation averages out to an overall increase in the prices for goods and services that one must pay domestically as well. Or, to look at it the other way around, a decrease in the total value of one's money. Obviously, the above process of depleting the wealth of citizens is a loosely controlled one, whose effects are realized only gradually over time. However, there is a new, more direct strategy in the works that will be able to kill two proverbial birds with one stone. The September 2021 Biden nominee for the U.S. Comptroller of the Currency, Sola Omarova, who was born and raised in Soviet-era Kazakhstan and wrote her thesis at Moscow State University on Karl Marx's economic analysis and the theory of revolution in the capital, although she has denied being a communist, published a controversial paper in the Vanderbilt Law Review entitled The People's Ledger: How to Democratize Money and Finance the Economy, wherein she proposed the obsolescence of private banks in favor of citizens having current accounts directly with the Federal Reserve, which would be denominated in a digital currency. In such a system, naturally, every transaction would be recorded by the Fed. On top of this, Omarova proposed a new fiscal stimulus plan whereby the government could decide to deposit or withdraw funds to or from citizens' digital accounts. After having been criticized by both Republicans and moderate Democrats for her proposed views, which they deemed to be socialist and anti-democratic, and while she said that she had not intended to implement the policies described in her paper in her position as the comptroller, Omarova withdrew her nomination for the comptroller position. In reaction, U.S. President Biden declared that Omarova had been subjected to inappropriate personal attacks, and that he would be looking for another nominee for the position.